The 9th season of Consider This is brought to you in part by From the Top, a national program showcasing the musical talents of young people. From the Top can be heard on KVNO Classical 90.7 each Sunday at 5 p.m.
Once again, from the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha, Consider This, a program of issues and information behind today's news.
Hello everyone, I'm Andrea McMaster and thank you for joining us for this edition of Consider This. The 99th Nebraska legislative session is over. It adjourned on Thursday, April 13th. During the session, it was many vigorous clashes from the beginning until the end. During the 60 days of the session, the senators voted to cut taxes, created a new crime of fetal assault, allowed Nebraskans to carry concealed handguns, and voted to break the Omaha Public School District into 3 new districts. Joining us today, we have 3 Nebraska senators with us. Senator Pam Brown, senator from Omaha, and Senator Pat Bourne, also from Omaha, both who are being forced out of the unicameral, said goodbye this year to the unicameral because of term limits, and Senator Ron Rakes from Lincoln, who was so busy this year as chair of the Education Committee working on the Omaha area school dispute bill, LB 1024, which we'll get to later in the show. So thank you all for joining us. It was a huge and busy legislative session, I understand.
Yes, it was.
You worked countless hours, in many hours, more than normal, an action-packed session this year.
For me, it was focused on primarily one issue. I had to hand off my usual duties to these other folks who filled in for me while I was off doing my thing. But yeah, it was one of the more difficult sessions that I've been through.
How would you characterize this legislative session overall?
Well, I think we accomplished a lot of things apart from the school issue, and I think that can never be missed. What we did with the sexual predator legislation, which Senator Bourne spent a lot of time on, and I would say that behind Senator Rakes and Senator Brashear, the Speaker, Senator Bourne was probably the busiest because of that legislation and because so many of the things have to do with the Judiciary Committee. But what we did there was to put so much money into community corrections, which is going to have a long-term benefit to the state, not only in appropriately handling individuals, but also in keeping people out of the correctional facilities, and so hopefully we can manage those long-term costs. Because with everything, we have to look at our long-term costs. We did some restructuring on Medicaid, and hopefully that will begin to address some of the long-term costs of Medicaid. But we have a lot of issues that have long-term implications.
I heard that it began ugly, finished ugly. I know Governor Heineman said on the last day of the session that this was a session that tested friendships, it tested alliances. We had a lot of vigorous clashes. It was the most action-packed session that we've seen in a long time. What would you say about that? Any other adjectives to describe it?
No, I think that's a fairly appropriate way to describe it. But you know, you constantly, as a legislator, you have to remind yourself constantly that everybody in there is trying to do the right thing. And Senator Rakes, Senator Brown, the school issue, every other issue, everyone in there is trying to do the right thing. And what we're really arguing about is the way to accomplish a particular goal. And so it might have tested friendships at particular times. I still walked away from the legislature having an enormous amount of respect for all of my colleagues, no matter how a vote went on a particular measure. Everybody down there is trying to do the right thing, and you can't help but respect that.
Well, let's talk about that last day. I heard it was the emotional one as 20 senators did say goodbye to the unicameral, and both Senator Brown and Senator Bourne, you were amongst those senators that did that, being forced out of the unicameral by term limits. What are your thoughts now that you are one who's the voter-imposed term limits basically is affecting you? What would you say about that? Do you agree? Do you still agree with it?
I don't agree with it, but I think it's the voter's choice, and I'm not worried about us. I think all of us will move on, have moved on. I think that there's such turnover anyway that it wasn't an issue of turnover so much as it is the institution itself. And I think that that's what most of it was partly feeling sad about leaving people, but we feel sad that way every year that we end the session. And those of us who are friends and good friends will remain good friends and find ways to spend time with one another. The institution is a different matter. And when there are 20 of us gone this year, that when another 26, I believe, or next year, in 2 years, it's just going to have an enormous impact on the way the institutional memory, who really has power within the government. And it worries me.
Well, one longtime lobbyist remarked that this session was one of the worst that he has seen because of the number of senators that felt the need to do something on their way out the door. What would you say about that?
I didn't really see it as that.
I don't agree with that at all. I mean, I think we just had a whole host of fairly contentious issues. Concealed carry that had been attempted, I don't know how many times for 20 years. The sexual predator bill, I mean, that wasn't as contentious because there was a lot of consensus. The school bill was extremely contentious. My sense was it was just the issues we're dealing with, and really the contention didn't have much to do with term limits, in my opinion.
Okay, well, let's talk about that sex offender law that passed in the legislature that Senator Bourne sponsored. The bill will create tougher penalties for adults who sexually assault children, allow some dangerous sex offenders to be committed to a state mental institution after a sentence is served, and it will also increase monitoring of those released into the community.
Right.
So why did you introduce this bill?
Well, I think looking at the sex offender issue was in large response to the law that Iowa put in, where they did residency restrictions. And they had a residency restriction 2,000 feet from schools, daycares, parks, playgrounds, basically anywhere children may congregate. Throughout the summer, we saw a number of states along the Missouri River, the Iowa border there, we saw a number of cities along the border between Nebraska and Iowa adopting residency restrictions. The Judiciary Committee held interim studies throughout the state and in Lincoln, and we looked at the issue, and we became convinced that residency restrictions didn't solve the problem. It was a way for politicians to pound their chests and say they did well and solve the problem, but the reality is, now that Iowa has that law in place, the number of sex offenders that they can't locate has tripled. They have over 80 offenders that have actually registered as their residences on rest stops along Interstate 80. And so I think that what they have done in Iowa is made their state a less safe place for our kids. So we took a look at the problem. Again, we had hearings across the state, and we tried to find out what worked. We examined every other state in the country, tried to figure out what worked in terms of statutory changes and what didn't. And so we came up with a whole host of solutions that we feel actually work. It's a comprehensive package that doesn't just rely on a gimmick, which is what I think residency restrictions are. And I think Nebraska is going to be a safer place for our kids because of the collective efforts of passing LB 1199.
Increased monitoring, the increased supervision, how will that actually work?
Well, right now, when an individual is released, they're rated. When they're released from confinement, they're rated in terms of their likelihood to reoffend. Right now, second and third degree sex offenders have to register and let the law enforcement know where they're going to live. But we don't monitor them. So we have third degree sex offenders who are more likely to reoffend. They say they live a certain place, but we never check to see if they're actually living there. So that was one of the holes that I felt we had in our system, is that if they say that they're living at a particular place, we never check up on them. So now what happens when they're released from prison, it's likely they would go be civilly committed if they're still at a danger to society. Once they're no longer a danger to society, they're released. But for third degree sex offenders who have had crimes against children, they're actually going to be supervised by the parole department. And so for the first time in Nebraska, we'll actually have those violent offenders who we can't incarcerate any longer because of the Constitution, who are out in the community, but will actually be supervised. So it's a huge safety measure, I think, for our citizens.
Okay. Well, Nebraskans will have the right to carry concealed handguns under a new bill, and this bill was opposed by both the Lincoln and Omaha mayors. I believe. And the bill sets out requirements for obtaining a 5-year permit to carry a concealed weapon. They include completion of a training program, a background check, seeking information including criminal and mental health records, and a payment of a $100 fee. Now, there are 40 states that have the right to carry laws, but both Lincoln and Omaha's mayors didn't want our state to have one. Is this something that you heard when you were discussing it in the
Absolutely,
legislature?
but one of the things, I'm sorry, you go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, one of the things that we didn't get to an amendment to talk about where you could carry them, and that even right now it's clear that Omaha and Lincoln and other communities can have ordinances that would preclude the law from being effective in the city limits. But even if they would allow concealed carry, though it said in there certain things about where it could be, there were a lot of places that were left off the list. There was an amendment that would have, instead of posting where you could not carry, it would post where you could carry, making it a little bit more obvious. But I had a lot of correspondence from people wanting to know if their business would have to participate, things like that. So.
And one thing to point out then is that Omaha has a law banning the carrying of concealed weapons, and that bill would then supersede that.
It's actually an ordinance, and in my opinion, as chair of the Judiciary Committee, the committee that the bill came through, Omaha's ordinance would stand, and they could prohibit concealed carry from being allowed in their city, as could Lincoln. So, you know, it's interesting. There's kind of it's an interesting issue because there's a dispute as to whether or not we preempted local ordinances, and in my reading of the bill, it's clear we did not. The NRA came in, the National Rifle Association came in, had a lobbyist there for the past 2 years, and I think it's pretty clear that we as a legislature did not preempt communities' ability to pass ordinances to ban concealed carry in their communities.
Okay. Well, let's get to LB 1024. What Senator Rakes has been waiting for here is the Omaha area school boundary dispute. And I know, Senator Rakes, you spent countless hours working on this bill. Did you have any idea when you came into the session this year that it was going to be like this?
I did, because of the OPS proposal last June. I knew that this would be a top issue. But just before we begin on that, let me just add a couple other comments to second Senator Brown's comment about the session. My feeling was it was an extremely productive session. In the education area, we did 1024. In my view, that was a significant achievement. Some others may disagree with that. But in addition to that, sort of slipped under the radar, we did a major change in distance education in Nebraska, how we provide that, how we incent schools to participate. And the other thing that both of these two had a big part in was we expanded our early childhood education effort in the state to 0 to 3, to the point where now I don't think it's a stretch to say that Nebraska in the area of early childhood is at the forefront of the nation. Now, there is a constitutional amendment that would have to pass in order for this to happen, but I'm confident that it will. And if it does, that could be maybe the most important thing that happened this session.
Absolutely. I agree.
That is interesting. You know, the newspapers hardly reported that. And Ron is exactly right. That is as progressive as it gets. I don't think there's another state in the country that is as far ahead on early childhood education as Senator Rakes has put Nebraska. And it's interesting, you know, they focus on the contentious issue, 1024, and they hardly reported on the fact that Senator Rakes championed that issue. And the kids in Nebraska you're going to see leaps and bounds in terms of their learning and productivity here in Nebraska because of Senator Rakes' efforts.
Well, the only thing I would disagree with that is actually Senator Bourne and Brown had at least as much to do with it as I did, and were key. In fact, Senator Bourne's bill was one of the ones that was used to advance a measure this year. So both of these were extremely important players in that. The other thing I would mention about term limits, I have a little bit different perspective coming back next year, in that these two will be gone. It's quite an advantage for a person in the legislature to be able to depend on other people in the body who have knowledge, experience, and judgment to deal with the issues. Now, my belief is that looking what familiarity I have with the candidates out there now, that we're going to have some very good people coming into the legislature next session. But there's just no way that hitting the ground the first day that you can have the kind of experience and judgment that we will lose with Pam and Patrick and the other 18 that will be gone.
Is there any way that you could go back and do away with the voter-imposed term limits? Is it set in stone?
The voters would need to do that.
Yeah, it's constitutional.
And so the voters are going to have to watch these next couple of years and see the effects that it's making on the legislature.
And I think it's hard to see some of the effects because, as Senator Riggs said, the new group of people are going to be very good. There's always turnover. I don't know that it's going to be as apparent. What concerns me is the transfer of power to the bureaucracy. I'm not so worried about lobbyists because lobbyists pretty much have it on their forehead what they're for and against, and so you pretty much know. But I think that the bureaucrats, even though they may be very good people and believe in very much in what they're doing, they're not elected. And I think that it's very problematic.
Okay. Well, let's get back to LB 1024. That was the Omaha area school boundary dispute, and Rake spent hours working on the bill, hoping to please both sides. I know, both OPS and the Coalition of the Suburban School Districts. Do you think that this bill should have even been debated in the Nebraska legislature? Should have come this far? I know the Coalition of Suburban School Districts said we want it to. OPS was a little shaky on what they wanted. They knew what they wanted to see done, and we're hoping it would go that way. But coming up with a compromise bill, was that something that should have been in the Nebraska legislature?
My view is that it clearly is in the bailiwick of the legislature. The legislature has authority over school finance and school district organization. This is an organization issue, and it clearly was in the legislature was the forum. The legislature was the body that needed to address the issue. So I don't think there's any doubt, at least in my mind, that the appropriate place for the issue was the legislature.
Okay, well, LB 1024 has had many changes, but let's talk about the very beginnings. More than 150 pages, I know. It was to create a learning community right in both Douglas and Sarpy counties, those 11 school districts in Douglas and Sarpy counties that would form this learning community, and then have a super school board that would oversee the 11 school districts.
Well, that remains the heart of the measure to its end. And let me just mention, Patrick is on the Education Committee and worked very hard on that part of the bill as well. Now, certainly 1024 is multifaceted, and a great many of the facets I think most people agree with, although I doubt if there's any player that is totally happy with the whole thing. The effort was to go down the middle, and by definition then you were not going to have somebody completely happy, and that's the way we ended up. Now I think there's particularly one provision of it in the end that seems most controversial now, but the learning community idea, where you've got a shared financial base in the entire metro area, where you've got an entity, a coordination entity to direct activities among the various school districts, where you've got a mutual effort to address educational opportunities and create more educational opportunities, and something Senator Bourne worked particularly hard on, an integration piece, whereby there is to be a plan put in place to integrate the schools, and every school district is required to participate, and at least in my view there's substantial teeth in it. If school districts don't participate, they would be dissolved and reassigned to other districts. So my view of it, looked at in total, is that a little, maybe not like early childhood, but it does put Nebraska out in the forefront in being willing to take these issues on head on and come up with an address. Now, I will tell you, one of the very first things we did when the OPS proposal came up was to look around the country thinking to ourselves, well, surely there's another metro area in the United States that has effectively dealt with this problem. So all we need to do is go in and copy what they did. Well,
And you
guess
couldn't
what?
find one.
Guess what? That's exactly right. So we had to forge out on our own, and it was the work of the committee, the staff, and members of the legislature, I think, that brought us the result. It's, again, not a result that everybody likes, or maybe nobody totally likes, but I really think it presents a significant opportunity for the metro area and the state of Nebraska.
Well, let's talk about the controversial part, if we can go there. That was the amendment introduced by Senator Ernie Chambers, a bill that would divide OPS into 3 new districts. And it's been called state-sponsored segregation, if you will, because the 3 school districts, one would be predominantly white, another would be mostly black, and another one largely Hispanic. I know that you're hearing so much about this. Warren Buffett's even come out and said it makes us look like a laughing stock of the nation. And then it's the battle on the campaign field for governor this year too, as well. Both Congressman Tom Osborne and Governor Heineman having different sides on that as well. So, where do you sit on this? What do you think about it?
Well, there were two pieces as far as I was concerned. I don't think anybody would have considered it absent the learning community, which is the policy piece. It's the integration piece. School districts are, at least within the context of 1024, are a management tool, and I think that is a fairly normal business model. But the second part of it is the information that was conveyed on the floor, and some of us had already struggled with, that smaller districts can be more beneficial to kids, especially high needs kids. That there is evidence that more money is spent directly in the classroom and that kids are more educationally successful. And that was a part of the rationale for doing it. That doesn't address some of the legal issues, but it addresses some of the rationale for it.
So, that's where I would disagree with Senator Brown. I mean, I got to tell you that there's more good things in 1024, to Senator Rake's credit, than bad. But to me, the segregation component, dividing Omaha into 3 districts, it is so bad that it can't justify the rest of the bill. And that's not Senator Rake's fault at all. Once a bill comes out onto the floor, you're kind of at the mercy of your colleagues, and sometimes they get away from you. And I'm not saying it did in this regard, but to say that Senator Rake's pushed that amendment is inaccurate. What bothers me is that Senator Chambers got up on the floor and he said black kids are better taught by black by black teachers who are better administered by black administrators. The original version of the amendment that Senator Chambers drafted and ran said that the Omaha Public Schools had to be divided into communities of interest. Well, that's clearly, in my mind, unconstitutional segregation language. Senator Chambers came back later and said, well, we're going to eliminate the community of interest language, but you are going to divide it up into contiguous districts with 2 to 3 high schools in each. So there's no way to draw the Omaha Public School map, at least in my opinion, any way other than a black, a white, and a Hispanic district. So I don't, in my mind, I never got down to the point where smaller is better, because on its face, it was segregation. And again, that was Senator Chambers' amendment. It wasn't Senator Rake's amendment. And I just have a real problem with that. I think if that amendment hadn't been adopted, Senator Rake's bill would be touted as a success or a good piece of legislation. But to me, that is so backwards what Senator Chambers did that it, in my mind, negated all the hard work that Senator Rake's did on the bill. That's my opinion.
With some serious legal, maybe some unconstitutional financial questions in this bill, then do you believe that it's going to be struck down in court?
Well, I'll take that on.
Okay.
Certainly, any sort of a provision, and it does have a separability clause. Is that the right phrase? So that if part of the bill is struck down because it's unconstitutional, that part goes, the rest remains.
Okay.
But this is an interesting discussion, I think, because my view, as Senator Brown pointed out was that we have created with the learning community the structure whereby all these school districts work together. So in effect, what you're doing is taking down the boundaries between school districts, particularly as concerns student movement, efforts to diversify schools, finances, and so on. So given that, is it reasonable or not to say that a local community, a local group, however you might define that community, should have the opportunity for say-so or control of local schools? Given that you're not separating off a group and sending them all out by themselves and saying, look, you take care of all your own finances, you take care of all your own curriculum issues, we're not going to help you with anything. That's not the way it is. The learning community is the structure by which all these districts have to cooperate. So given that context, is it or is it not a good idea to have districts within this learning community set up so that communities have control over the public schools? And I think it's a reasonable question as to what you do.
Well, we just have 2 minutes left, so I also wanted you to talk a little bit about, it's 2008, right, is when this learning community...
2008-9.
8-9. Okay, so we have a while to go. So can fine-tuning take place? Is it set in stone? That's the question that everybody keeps on asking.
Absolutely, absolutely.
That's what the learning community is about, to making policy decisions for the entire metropolitan area.
Okay, Senator Bourne, we have a couple minutes there.
Well, part of the problem that I have with the amendment that Senator Chambers got passed on the floor is that his information is totally inaccurate. I mean, 58% of the elementary schools in Omaha are more diverse than the neighborhoods in which the school is located. 58%. 63% of the middle schools are more diverse than the neighborhoods in which they're located, and 74% of the high schools are. So we have integration here in Omaha. Senator Chambers also talked about how his kids down at Conestoga don't have pencils and books and things. And OPS maintains they spend $1,300 more per student at Conestoga, which is a North Omaha school, than they do out west at Catlin Elementary School. So there was a whole host of misinformation presented, in my opinion, by Senator Chambers on the floor. And, again, 1024 was a good piece of work. Senator Rakes did a great effort on that. But to me, the separating into the racial districts so taints the entire process in the bill that I stopped supporting it at that time.
And the big thing for people to all understand, since we have to wrap up now, is that this is not over. The debate and the discussion is going to continue.
As it should.
And one of the things that I would point to is looking at housing patterns and what we need to do to encourage more diversity in the community as a whole.
Okay, thanks for joining us this week on Consider This.
Consider This is an issues and information program produced by UNO Television. More information and program archives can be found at unotv.unomaha.edu. If you'd like to share your comments about this show, call UNO TV at 402-554-2516 during regular business hours.
The 9th season of Consider This is brought to you in part by From the Top, a national program showcasing the musical talents of young people. From the Top can be heard on KVNO Classical 90.7 each Sunday at 5 p.m.